The content of this episode is for entertainment purposes only. Historical events and figures discussed are based on documented records, scholarly research, and primary sources. This episode contains discussions of murder, assassination, sexual misconduct involving a minor, and the systematic abuse of institutional and ecclesiastical power. The Velvet Guillotine does not endorse any political, religious, or ideological interpretation of the events portrayed. The criticism offered here is directed at the documented conduct of specific historical figures and the institutional structures of a particular era, not at any faith, religious community, or the belief of its adherents. Listener discretion is advised. You have just come from the Cadaver Synod. You watched a pope dig up his dead predecessor, dress the body in vestments, prop it upon a throne, scream at it, convict it, and pitch it in the Tiber. And I imagine that some of you are sitting there very pale and thinking, well, this has to be the worst thing that has ever happened in the history of the papacy. Surely, there's nowhere that you can go from a corpse in a chair on trial. And oh, darlings, there is so much further to go. We have barely left the lobby. Welcome back to the Velvet Guillotine. I'm April Rain, and this is the Postscript. And tonight's Postscript is a tour. So consider me your guide. Mind that velvet rope, keep your hands to yourself, do not feed the cardinals, and follow me. Because if we're going to talk about institutional corruption, we may as well visit the institution with the longest continuous run, the most tightly concentrated power, and by a wide margin, the best documented record of human beings doing absolutely staggering things in the name of God. The Cadaver Synod, you see, was the symptom. Tonight is the diagnosis. So step lively, stay with the group. Welcome to the Papal Hall of Shame. We begin our tour in the year 896 because it is a vintage year, and it contains the Cadaver Synod itself, and it manages to be the single most concentrated burst of papal chaos that you will ever see crammed into 12 months. Because in the year 896, darlings, there were 4 popes. Not one right after the other in a tiny, dignified procession, by the way. There were 4 popes in overlapping, contested, frequently violent succession, like a revolving door that somebody has set on fire. So let me walk you down this line. Formosus, our man from the main episode, the future occupant of the chair, he dies in April. He is then succeeded by Boniface VI, who manages to hold the most powerful spiritual office in Christendom for 11 days before he dies. And of gout, some sources might say. Of foul play, others might say. But of the 9th century papacy, says everyone who has studied the 9th century papacy. Then comes Stephen VI. You know Stephen. Stephen of the screaming and the corpse in the river. Stephen, who is in due course strangled in his cell. He is succeeded by Romanus, who lasted 4 months before being deposed and bundled off to a monastery to think about what he had done. Romanus is succeeded by Theodore II, who lasted that 20 days, remember? Just long enough to rehabilitate poor Formosus, and then exhausted by the effort, presumably, he died. 4 popes, 1 year. 3 of them gone within months of taking the job. And the turnover, my loves, is not what one associates with eternal and unchanging spiritual authority. I can tell you that. So now let me give you the broader actuarial picture, because the individual deaths are lurid, but the trend is the real exhibit. Between 872 and 904, that's only 32 years, by the way, there were 10 popes. 10. John VIII was assassinated. And I want to specify the method because it is very instructive. He was poisoned. And when the poison proved insufficiently prompt, he was then beaten to death. Belt and suspenders, the whole 9 yards. Aidan III died under circumstances suspicious enough that everyone simply assumed murder and then just moved on. No investigation, nobody looked into anything. Stephen VI was strangled, Romanus deposed and sent to a monastery, and Theodore II, those 20 days. Tally it all up. 3 confirmed murders, several more probable ones, 2 forced depositions, and 1 trial of a corpse. This, darlings, is the institution claiming spiritual sovereignty over the entire Western Christendom. Mind the rope. We're going to continue. Now to a portrait that I promised you in the main episode. Step a little bit closer. This is Sturgis III, and he is every bit as charming as advertised. Sergius came to power in 904, after an earlier attempt to seize the papacy in 897, which he had failed at, and that earned him 7 years in exile. But he didn't come back chastened. He came back with an army, on loan from the Theophylactic family, the dynasty that ran Rome the way that other families run a vineyard. And when Sergius arrived in Rome to find his prize, he found a very small inconvenience. He had 2 immediate predecessors, Leo V and Christopher, who were both in prison. And then, shortly after his arrival, both of them died in that very same prison. The sources, ever discreet, disagree on whether there was natural causes or a touch of assistance. But most historians look at the timing, raise a single eyebrow, and conclude that the circumstantial case of murder is, shall we say, robust. The 2 predecessors, conveniently pre-incarcerated, expired on schedule. That man definitely had a gift for tidiness. He also, and I absolutely adore this because it is so perfectly in character for this whole sorry century, he took one more swing at Formosus, who had at this point been dead for 8 years and rehabilitated twice. Sergius declared Formosus' acts void all over again, and he ordered every priest that Formosus had ever ordained to be reordained. He was relitigating the Cadaver Synod from beyond 2 graves, a decade after the screaming had stopped by Stephen. But the grievance of this era did not die. They did not even slow down. They simply waited for a new pope to pick them back up again. And Sergius is also, by the account of our favorite venomous chronicler, the man who fathered a child with Marozia, the daughter of his patron Theodora. And Marozia was approximately 15 years old at the time. And the child that Marozia bore? Well, that child grew up in the machinery inside of the Roman power. And that child became, in the fullness of time, Pope John XI. A pope's son by a 15-year-old girl, raised to occupy the throne of St. Peter. This, darlings, is not a scandal in the family tree. This is the family tree. Sergius reigned 7 years and died of natural causes, which in this company, on this tour, counts as a genuinely astonishing personal accomplishment. So mind your step, because the next room is the most interesting one in the entire building. Now, I want you to give this one your full attention, because this is where the tour starts to get serious for a moment. And not because the room is grim, but because the woman in it has been done a disservice for over 1,000 years, and I would like to correct it properly and on the record. Marozia is one of the most formidable political operators of the entire early medieval period. And she is routinely shoved into a footnote by histories that would much rather discuss the men who held the offices that she actually ran. She was the daughter of Theodora and Theophylactic, the family that owned Roman politics at the time. And by her mid-20s, she was personally managing the network that decided who got the papacy. She arranged the installation of multiple popes. And when Pope John X broke with her, she had him arrested and smothered to death in his sleep with a pillow in the Castile St. Angelo. And then she replaced him with a candidate of her own choosing. She married Guido of Tuscany, maneuvered her own son by Sergius onto the throne as Pope John XI, and for a stretch of the early 930s, she effectively ruled Rome outright, her son holding the papacy, her husband holding the army, and Marozia holding both of them. She was eventually brought down, and not by the church, and not by an emperor, but by her own son from her second marriage, Albert II. And he looked at his mother's ambitions and decided that they threatened his own. So he deposed her and he imprisoned her. She actually died behind those walls that he imprisoned her behind. Marozia controlled the papacy for roughly 3 decades, and she did it as a woman. She did it in a world that offered women not one single formal channel to political power. So she became a Grand Master of the informal ones. And here is the part that I'm not going to let slide past any of you. When men do this, it is called statescraft. But when Marozia does it, history reaches for a word like pornocracy and then prints it for 1,000 years. And they tut-tut behind their fans about harlots. And they look anywhere but at the career that she actually had and what that actually proves. And what it proves is the whole thesis of this episode, stated more plainly than anywhere else. The papacy in this period was not a spiritual office that occasionally got tangled up in politics. It was a political office wearing a spiritual costume. And when Marozia was the one working the levers, the costume was not fooling a single soul in Rome. She saw the machine for exactly what it was, and she just happened to be better at running it than the men whose names went on the documents. And now, my darlings, we come to the headliner of the show. This is the portrait that everyone comes to the gallery to see, and I give you a taste of him in the main episode. But tonight, you're going to get the full canvas. We're talking about Pope John XII. John XII became Pope in 955 at roughly 18 years of age. He was Marozia's grandson through Alberic, and he inherited the papacy precisely the way that a spoiled prince inherits a duchy. His father extracted deathbed oaths from the Roman nobility, guaranteeing this boy's succession. There was no conclave, there was no discernment. This was just a dying man's arm twisting and an 18-year-old being handed the keys to all of Christendom. He was, I think I can say with some confidence, not suited for the office. He was, however, exquisitely suited for the life of an obscenely wealthy young aristocrat with unlimited funds, no supervision whatsoever, and an entire holy city to use as his playground. He hunted compulsively. He maintained a busy and varied romantic schedule, and he conducted himself inside the Lateran Palace in a manner that drew pointed commentary even from clergy whose standards by this point in our tour, you understand, were not exactly delicate. In 963, the Holy Roman Emperor Otto I, an actual grown-up with actual responsibilities, had finally seen enough, and he convened a synod to deal with the situation. And let me say this again, that the formal list of charges that were read against John XII is literally one of my very favorite documents in all of recorded history. So I want you to gather round because I'm going to read it to you very slowly this time. He ordained a deacon in a horse stable. That is not a metaphorical stable, that is a very literal one, and there were horses standing in the stable at the time. He ordained a 10-year-old child as a bishop, for money naturally. He blinded his confessor, which was a man named Adrian. He castrated and then murdered a cardinal named John. He toasted the health of the devil out loud and by name at a gambling table. And he converted the Lateran Palace, which was the papal residence and the holiest house in all of the Western world, into a working, functioning brothel. And the gambling detail somehow is the one that lingers. So I want you to picture it. The 20-something Pope at a gambling table deep in a losing streak, and he lifts his cup and starts drinking to Satan's good health. Well, did it happen precisely that way? We will never know. But here is the part that actually tells you something. His own contemporaries found it entirely plausible. They heard that and they thought, yes, that tracks. Copy. And when the person that knows you best will believe that you toasted the devil over cards? My friend, you have built quite the reputation for yourself. Otto presented the charges and moved to depose him. John fled the city, and from hiding, he fired back a letter to the assembled clergy. The letter was described by his contemporaries as barely literate, and in that letter he threatened to excommunicate the lot of them if they dared to continue. They continued, and John came back with soldiers. Otto came back with more soldiers. John fled again, and John died shortly after that, of a stroke, of an aggrieved husband, or of a plain 27-year-old's excess. It's going to depend on which source that you find most romantic as to whether that question gets answered for you or not. And he had been pope for 9 years. He was 27 when it ended. Do the arithmetic on that, and then I want you to sit with that for just a minute. Okay, one more room, and then I promise I'll let you sit down on this tour. If John XII is the high watermark of personal scandal, this last gentleman represents something colder, and to my mind, much more genuinely disturbing, because John was merely a debauched young man with no supervision, whereas Benedict IX managed to reduce the throne of St. Peter to a line item, a commodity, and something with a price. Benedict IX was the first elected pope in 1032. At an age the sources place somewhere between 12 and 20 years old, and the Church, for reasons that I am sure require no explanation, has always preferred that higher number. He came from the Tusculani family, who regarded the papacy as a piece of inheritable property, and he occupied it in exactly that same spirit. His conduct in office was described by his contemporaries as wildly inconsistent with the dignity of the position. The specific charges vary with the hostility of the source, but the consensus is that he ran the latter in the way one runs a great household when there is no one alive that can tell you no. He was deposed in 1044 by a popular uprising and replaced by a rival, Sylvester III. He returned in 1045, deposed Sylvester right back, and then, my darlings, here is his masterstroke. Here is the thing that actually earns him the very room of his own. He sold it. He sold the papacy. And he sold it to his own grandfather, who was a genuinely pious priest named John Gratian. And it was for a great deal of money. Now, the sources are actually split on the motive of this sale, whether it was straightforward simony or the naked sale of a holy office, or if it was the desperate improvisation of a man who wanted out and needed funds to manage his exit. Any of those readings is absolutely remarkable. And John Gratian, for his part, appears to have sincerely believed that buying the papacy from his own corrupt grandson was a way to govern it virtuously and with a neat spiritual upgrade for all of Christendom. So he paid, and he became Pope Gregory VI. He had, I suppose, the cleanest conscience of anyone who has ever committed simony for the throne of St. Peter. And that sale left the situation in 1045 at this. There were 3 men who were simultaneously claiming to be the one true pope. You have Sylvester III, you have Gregory VI, and you have Benedict IX. Benedict IX, who had personally sold the office and then characteristically changed his mind about leaving it. It took the entire empire to clean this up. Henry III convened a synod in 1046 that deposed all 3 claimants and installed his own man. Benedict made one last grab for Rome in 1047, briefly held it, and then was driven out for good. He saw out the rest of his days in a monastery, where, by most accounts, he underwent a genuine conversion. The record is kind of murky, though, and the propaganda for each direction is thick, so I will not pretend to know this man's soul. But this part is not murky at all. A boy was made pope in his childhood or early adolescence. He held the office 3 separate times, and at one point, he actually sold it for cold hard cash. The papacy had been turned into real estate, and unlike so much in this period, that transaction was documented. So there is paperwork, because, my darlings, there is always paperwork. All right, my loves, lights up. The tour is over, and I want to step out from behind the guide's podium for just a minute, because the most interesting question in this entire building is not in any of the rooms that we just walked through. It is simply this: how did the church survive all of this? How does an institution sustain its claims to be the most spiritual authority of an entire civilization through decades of murder, child popes, corpse trials, pillow smotherings, and the open sale of its highest office? How do you come back from any of that, let alone all of it? Part of the answer is theological, and it is genuinely clever. Medieval Catholic thought had developed a careful framework separating the validity of a sacrament or an official act from the personal virtue of the man performing it. A corrupt pope issuing a valid canonical ruling still issues a valid ruling. The authority of the office does not depend on the character of its occupant. Now, depending on where you stand, that is either a profound theological insight about grace operating independently of human worthiness, or it is one of the most effective instruments of institutional self-protection ever devised. A clean wall sealing the question of authority off from the question of accountability, so that no scandal, however vast, can ever reach the legitimacy of the institution itself. It will let you decide which. And I suspect it is both at once, and that the genius of it is precisely that it can be both at once. Part of the answer is the simple absence of an alternative. The church in the 9th and 10th centuries was not one spiritual option on a menu. It was the menu. It was the single framework through which all of social, spiritual, and political life was conducted. Leaving was not a practical possibility. Reforming it from the outside was structurally impossible because there was no outside. And so people did what people always do. They worked with what they had, and they waited. And another part of the answer, and this is the part that I want you to carry home, is that reform, when it finally did come, it didn't come from within. Gregorian reform of the 11th century eventually addressed the structural weaknesses that made this whole gallery possible. The College of Cardinals developed into a more rule-governed way of choosing popes. Canon law was systemized. And notice, please, that the very engine of every bit of this was the emperors. Otto, who came to handle John XII, Henry, who came to clean up the three-pope farce. Well, they were self-interested men, certainly, and they did have motives of their own. But they were external men. It was external pressure, and it was forced external accountability. That is what moved the institution towards reform. Every single time that reform happened, that is what produced it. Not self-examination, not an internal awakening of conscience, not the procedures policing people themselves, but external constraints applied from outside by people the institution could not simply outvote or excommunicate or bury in a monastery. And that, my darlings, is the actual lesson sitting underneath all the corpses and the card games and the cash. It is not that the church is uniquely wicked, because it's not. And it is not that this institution was irredeemable, because it's not. It was reformed. It is simply unusually old and unusually well documented, which means that we get to read the whole chart. The lesson is narrower and far more useful than either of those. And it is this: an institution without sufficient external accountability will reliably, predictably, drift towards the behavior that we spent this hour touring. Toward the pillow in the Castel St. Angelo, toward the office for sale, toward a man screaming at a 9-month-old corpse in a cathedral. So here is the thing to take with you. Any institution that tells you that it does not need outside oversight, that's its internal processes are insufficient and that you should trust the procedure rather than examine the outcomes, well, that institution is, whether it knows it or not, already walking a road that the 9th century papacy surveyed and mapped in exhaustive, well-documented detail. We have the map. The only question is whether we bother to read it or not. This has been the Velvet Guillotine. I'm April Rain. Stay dark. And remember, darlings, the Lateran Palace has seen some things.